Okay, let's start today with a little time travel. In your minds, I want you to go back to a first day. This could be any first day in your life. It could be the first day of high school. It could be the first day you lived on your own. It could be the first day at a new job, or maybe the first day of being a parent. Do you remember how you felt? I'm guessing it was probably 10% excited and 90% terrified. Looking back on it now, that fear probably seems silly. But in that moment, it probably felt like the scariest thing in the world. And that's likely because it felt like a major turning point in your life. Now, the past few weeks, we've been talking about things that grow our faith, things that make our faith grow bigger and stronger than ever before. We've been talking about how our faith can go from being something someone else has taught me to something that's mine. And maybe, more than anything else, turning points in life do just that. And chances are you've had a few turning points in life already. These are the moments that turn our lives upside down and push us in a new direction, often in ways we didn't intend to go. You've probably experienced events like this more than once in your life. Maybe your spouse got a new job and you had to move to another state. Maybe the person you thought you were going to marry ended the relationship. Maybe you got let go from the dream job you wanted to have for the rest of your life. Maybe you suddenly lost a parent or a family member. Maybe you supported and cared for a loved one through a terminal illness. Maybe the balance in your bank account was so low you weren't sure how to make ends meet. Or maybe your kids were making bad choices and you never even saw it coming. Turning points often result from difficult times that challenge us. That in and of itself doesn't make them faith builders though. It's what we do in those moments that changes things. I'd venture to say you rarely hear a faith story that doesn't include some challenging, out of the blue, or didn't sign up for it circumstance. You may hear such a story and think, how did they recover from this? And then they make it through saying things like, God did something in the middle of my circumstance, and I don't think he could have done it any other way. I wouldn't sign up for it, and I wouldn't want to go through it again. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But God used a circumstance that looked really bad to grow my faith in a really good way. These circumstances are the turning points. They're the defining moments, times that have the potential to shape our faith in a very real way. When you get to the other side of these turning points, you're able to look back and say, wow, there is a God. He was with me the whole time. Now, I don't know about you, but that's something I want for my own life. While none of us would choose to deal with the major turning points in our lives, we probably all would say that if we had to take them on, we want them to have a purpose. And with God, they can have a purpose. One of the best illustrations of a life-changing turning point comes from the life of Jesus. We're going to take a look at it in John 11. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Now, this verse holds key details. They weren't just random people Jesus stumbled upon. They were his close friends. So after Lazarus got sick, Mary and Martha reached out to Jesus, their friend, for help. The sisters sent word to Jesus. They sent a messenger to find Jesus, who was days away by travel on foot. And their message said this, Lord, the one you love is sick. Now, they didn't simply say, Lord, Lazarus is sick. No, they said, Lord, the one you love is sick. See, they knew Jesus would automatically know who they were talking about. There was no need to even say his name. That's how close they were to Jesus at the time. And Mary and Martha knew Jesus had healed many people, even strangers. So, of course, when Lazarus became sick with a life-threatening illness, they called on Jesus to show up. Well, when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory. Jesus was saying that things like sickness and illness and disease, those major turning points in our lives, can be for God's glory. Now, if I'm being honest here, I'd say that sounds great for other people, but I kind of prefer God getting the glory when things go awesome in my life. But you and I know that's not how it always works. That's why Jesus was saying there's another way to give glory to God. When something challenging is introduced in your life, God can use it to help you and the people watching you to understand him better. In tough times, God works in you so that he can work through you. Of course, this isn't always easy to see in the moment, but it is possible that our biggest turning points can be the biggest faith shapers in our lives and the lives of others. To show you what I mean, let's go back to the story. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. In other words, Jesus did exactly what you would not expect him to do. He did nothing. 2 days passed. Then, finally, Jesus moved. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." Now, this threw the disciples for a loop, because the last time they were in Judea, they had nearly been stoned to death. So there was understandably some hesitation in the group about returning. But Jesus went on to explain why it was important. "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead." Talk about a turning point. Can you imagine what the disciples were thinking? They knew the closeness of Jesus' relationship with Lazarus and his sisters, and yet Jesus had allowed Lazarus to die. Jesus continued, "For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe." Now, at first glance, this statement sounds crazy. I mean, why would Jesus say he was glad to have missed the opportunity to save his dear friend? Well, it's because Jesus knew the potential of this turning point. Jesus used the whole situation, as terrible as it was, to grow people's faith. The death of his closest friend did so much for other people's trust in God. And finally, Jesus said this, "But let us go to him." And Jesus finally approached his friend's house. Martha saw him and ran to him, and she fell at his feet. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now, this was a loaded moment. Jesus had healed so many people before, strangers and enemies and people who were undeserving, but he chose not to heal his friend. And Martha continued, "But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." She was standing in front of Jesus. She was broken and angry. But even then, Martha still believed that God would give Jesus anything he asked. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" That's what this moment was really all about. In the emotion of the circumstances, in the confusion, in the hurt, and the pain, the point is this: where we put our trust and confidence is what matters, especially in the turning point circumstances that could wreck our faith. Martha responded, "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." Martha believed. She believed in Jesus even though her brother died. Still, she trusted him. And John tells us this happened after this exchange. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." See, Jesus felt in that moment exactly what we feel when we mourn, when we get no answer, when our hopes are shattered. Jesus gets our difficult and challenging circumstances because he lived them too. And he knows that no matter the outcome, they have the potential to shape our faith in big, life-changing ways. In this instance, Jesus then did something crazy. He asked Mary and Martha if they'd have the stone covering Lazarus' grave removed. But keep in mind, at this point, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. It wasn't pretty in there, so this was a really strange request. Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" In other words, move the stone. Because then Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and the story ended this way. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. Listen, whenever life gets hard, whether it's with family, friends, health, school, our future, or just big life changes, our first response is to often think that we're alone, to believe that Jesus doesn't care, to see no way any good could possibly come out of what we're walking through. But what I love about this story is the window we get to see into Jesus' heart. He cares so deeply about our pain. He shows up in it with us. He's present. He experiences it with us. In our hardest turning points in life, Jesus doesn't remove himself from us. He draws us closer. This story also shows us what can be possible in the pain. It's possible for our faith to grow, for God to use the pain to show us more about himself. It's possible to go through incredibly tough stuff and come through it trusting God more. Not because he made it go away, but because he used it to stretch you and to grow you and to show you more of himself. And when that happens, people around us will see God in a bigger way. Just like the people who surrounded Mary and Martha. It will make God more obvious to them too. And maybe, just maybe, they'll choose to trust God more as we learn to do the same. Because in tough times, God works in you so that he can work through you. Now, here's the truth. You're going to hit some turning points in life. You've probably already hit a few, and you're likely to experience a few more. Every time you do, you will be tempted to lean away from God. But at the same time, if you hang on tight to what you know about him, if you choose to trust him, your faith can become more real than ever. It can become more of a faith that you can call mine. And remember, when you hit bumps in life, it might be that God's goal is not just for you to get past it. It could be that God wants to do something through you in the life of someone else. It could be that your turning points may be the turning point in the faith of someone around you. And while that doesn't make the pain easier, it does give it purpose, and that can be helpful. There's no pain or challenge so great that it keeps God from working in big ways in your life. He can use anything. When you feel like God is doing something to you, it's easy to let your faith shrink or to walk away from it entirely. But when you see that God is doing something in you so that he can do something through you, then you'll emerge on the other side of a turning point and say, I still believe. And when you see God working through your story, even in the turning points, your faith will be more your own than ever before. Suffering and difficult circumstances are part of everyone's story. And as we saw in Lazarus' story, they can be an important part. These times aren't meaningless. For all of history, God has been using turning points to drive people toward him. And if you let him, he can do the same with yours. All of us will experience tough days and life-changing moments. It's our responsibility to choose how we respond to them. And my prayer for us is that we'll respond with faith. My hope is you'll run toward God so that he can work in you and through your story.